Hi, my name is Narbeh COF, and I'm making the claim that steroid users in Major League Baseball will never be inducted into the Hall of Fame. My first premise is that Baseball Hall of Fame election rules make a big difference in the voting. My second premise is that the baseball people that are voting those athletes into the Baseball Hall of Fame will be looking at statistics to see how it varies year to year. And my third premise is that voters will pay attention to statistics. Voters like the Hall of Fame ballots from year to year. Those that each year is going to make a big difference. So my third premise is saying that those voting into the Hall of Fame, they're going to look at past ballots, and that's going to make an impact. So my first premise is that, I'm going to give a quick background information on the Baseball Writers Association of America. They are the people that vote people into the Baseball Hall of Fame, and it's called the BBWAA, so Baseball Writers Association of America. So the first rule that I'll be going over, which was my first premise, is rule number 5, and it states that voting shall be based upon the player's record, playing ability, integrity, and sportsmanship, and that comes from the baseballhall.org, which this is where you can get all the information. And so rule number 5, the people that vote baseball players into the Hall of Fame, they look for sportsmanship, integrity, and if you use steroids, clearly you're cheating, and you're making it easier for yourself to get into the Hall of Fame. And so my first premise and the second point of my premise is that it affects, unfortunately, some athletes that are trying to make the Hall of Fame. For example, Craig Biggio. He played for the Houston Astros for about 20 years. He was 5'11" and I believe 185 pounds. You can get this information from Baseball Reference. He was one of only 28 members to hit 3,000 hits in his career. And from SB Nation, which is an American sports network, it says he matured, got out from behind the plate, and his power took off in a prolonged, consistent way. So baseball, those people that are voting people into the Baseball Hall of Fame, they're looking for consistency. And unfortunately, Craig Biggio missed the induction by only 0.2%. And you get 15 attempts to make into the Baseball Hall of Fame, but for someone that never cheated and was never linked to steroids, unfortunately he missed it because the people that were using steroids and were on the ballot, they made a big impact. He never hit more than 24 home runs. So when baseball people see that he's 5'11", 185 pounds, they see that it's consistent, and he never all of a sudden jumped a big amount. And this will lead on to my second premise, which is how baseball inductees, people that vote for baseball players in the Hall of Fame, they look into statistics. So let me begin with Mark McGwire. He played for a long amount of time for a different couple of teams. So usually when you get to a certain age, you stop your production kind of decreases, right? No, but at Mark McGwire, at age 34, he had 70 home runs, 147 RBIs, which is an unbelievable amount, which basically broke a record at that time. At age 35, he had 65 home runs and 147 RBIs. But at age 33, his production was only about 40 home runs. So you see a big jump. And moving on to Roger Clemens, he was considered one of the greatest pitchers of all time. At age 33, he was 10 wins and 13 losses. That's clearly not a great record. But the next year, he improved to 21 wins and 7 losses. That's 1 year difference, and that never really happens. Richard Hidalgo, another athlete. He, in 1999, had 15 home runs and 56 RBIs. The next year, he jumped to 44 home runs and 122 RBIs. That is something that's never seen before. 25 home run increase, or about 30 home runs. And all these athletes that I'm naming right now, they were stated in the Mitchell Report. The Mitchell Report was a 21-month investigation by Senator George Mitchell. It was an investigation done on steroids and PEDs. So all these players named were clearly in them. And another player, Brady Anderson. In 1995, he had 16 home runs and 64 RBIs, and the next year 50 home runs. So that's something that's never been seen before. So there was an interview done to Mets outfielder Cliff Floyd, who never used steroids, and he said they think that when they hit the ball, it will go farther, and when they hit before, they have this different attitude, like they're going to be invincible. So when I'm naming those players like Mark McGwire, Roger Clemens, they have this mentality that they're going to be invincible, and the baseball inductees and the people that are voting, they look into this and see that there's a form of invincibility. The production is a dramatic increase, and these numbers, the Cliff Floyd was interviewed by the New York Times. My last premise was that past Hall of Fame voting gives an insight to the future for those that abuse steroids. So let's look into the 2014 Hall of Fame ballot, which can be seen on MLB.com. Roger Clemens fell from 35% to 37% to 35%. Barry Bonds, who I'm sure many of you heard of, fell from 36 to 34. Sammy Sosa fell from 12% to 7%. And Rafael Palmeiro fell from 8 to 4%. Now, you get 15 tries, but if you fall under 5%, you're automatically taken off the ballot. And all these players are people that use steroids and were on the Mitchell report. And as we're seeing that instead of voters looking to induct them to the Hall of Fame, they just keep getting off the list. And the last quote that I have at MLB.com, Hall of Fame voters have issued an even stronger message than they are delivered in last year's voting. And that's clear evidence that as a year go by and they see that more steroid users are going to be on the ballot, the less percentage, the less the chance they're going to make the Hall of Fame. So I hope these statistics and this information concludes that steroid users will never make the Hall of Fame.
All right, well, the proposition is clearly labeled. It's a little convoluted in the way it's expressed, and I think you need to give a little bit of background on the controversy because, at the end, it's pretty easy to figure out what you're saying, but at the beginning, it just sounds like it's an inventory of a whole bunch of the scandals that went on, and you really do have a specific point that you're trying to make. So I think that even though we know generally what the proposition is, it still needs a little bit of work. That doesn't mean that you didn't do a pretty good job on it, just a couple things that could be improved. I thought you got a little lost on that third point in the preview because it sounds to me like you're making this self-fulfilling prophecy argument, and wasn't sure if that applied to the ball players themselves or to the writers that do the voting. As we got to the point when it's developed below, it really does feel like it's more about the writers, although there's an earlier point when you quote one of the other ball players who didn't cheat as to how this affects the players and their attitudes. So I'm not exactly sure. Maybe that's supposed to fit into that particular point also. The internal signposting was fine. I thought you did a pretty good job establishing your credibility because you seem to be conversant in all the baseball statistics and the players and the events that are going on there. So that I think helps give you a little bit of credibility. Some of the claims, though, were just awkwardly phrased. That whole second point, for instance, is just not clear what it is ultimately that you're saying here, and you need to have a simpler way of expressing the idea behind the argument there so that we know what inference it is you want us to draw. I'm listening to your explanation. It all sounds like the ideas are connected to each other, but what does it mean? I don't think that you make that clear to the audience. You've got a lot of examples that you use. I think that was pretty good, and there's some good statistical information in the presentation. I think that the sources, the testimony could be a little bit stronger, but there was some good testimony information, and you did a pretty good job citing the sources on most of the information as well. I'm just, like I said, confused sometimes because statistics or examples appear, and I'm not sure how they advance the point that you're making. You've got the example, for instance, of Craig Bizio having 3,000 hits. He misses the voting by 0.2%, and I'm going, okay, so what does that prove? Does that prove that good players are being held back by the bad players? What's the reason to believe that he missed by the 2.2% because there were cheaters on the ballot with him? If you could, for instance, point out that the voting was unusually low that particular year, and that might have affected him, then I could see the inference. But your explanation there was not clear, and that was confusing. The same thing happens in a couple of other places where you're citing a whole bunch of examples of cheaters, and I'm going, okay, so I know all these people, were cheating, but what does that mean? The last point, I think, helps make the argument a little bit more effective and more practical, and that is that the people that were, suspected of cheating, when they are finally hitting the ballot, instead of gaining support, they're losing support. And I think that's the way you want to present that argument. It says there's a good reason to believe that they'll never get on the ballot because as each year has come up, their support has actually been less and less. And usually it goes the other way. When people are on the ballot, they get closer and closer. Then you're saying they're getting further and further away. And I think that makes that's the argument that you're making there. I just think that the wording on it needs to be a little bit clearer. All right, thank you.